Hello, and welcome to Sustainability Marketing, Lecture 1, Marketing in the 21st Century, Episode 2, The Evolution of Marketing. In the last episode, we looked at progress towards a sustainable century with the emergence of the concept of sustainable development. In this episode, we'll look at the evolution of marketing and think about how the two came together. And then Episode 3 will be made up of an interview. In terms of the learning outcomes for this episode, I'd like you to try and understand the nature of marketing and how it has evolved over time. Also, we'll develop a critique of this conventional mainstream marketing management paradigm and understand why it may have shortcomings. And then finally, the third learning outcome is really to help you appreciate the roots of sustainability marketing as a new approach to tackling the existing problems that marketing has and looking at it as a form of marketing that we think is fit for the future. The structure of this particular episode: we'll begin by looking at definitions of marketing and how we think about it. We'll look at how the understanding of marketing has evolved over time and some of the key components of marketing as it's developed really over the last few decades. Finally, we'll look at how a sense of crisis emerged within the discipline of marketing over the last few years. And then finally look at sustainability and marketing really as what we like to think of as the marketing of the future. So just to begin with, what is marketing? And if you hear the word marketing, it can be used really in a number of different ways, a number of different contexts. Sometimes when it's being used, people are talking about an activity. Sometimes they're talking about a management process. They can be talking about it as an academic discipline. Sometimes they might refer to a particular function or department within a business. And finally, it may be a philosophy, a way of doing business or approaching things that people are talking about. So it's really quite a sort of flexible word. If we go to, there are many definitions available. One of the most popular, really because it's very short and simple, comes from the Chartered Institute of Marketing, which defines it as marketing is the management process responsible for identifying, anticipating and satisfying consumers' requirements profitably. And in many things that tends to sum up, I think, the way that we'll be talking about marketing within these lectures. Very much as a management process is the point of view we'll be looking at it Marketing can be applied to many different things. It can be goods and services. When we talk about marketing, we tend to think about goods and services, but they're not the only things that can be marketed. Places can be marketed as holiday destinations, for example, or places for people to invest in or go to university at. Organisations can be marketed. So we see schools, hospitals, even churches these days being marketed to try and get people to patronise them. People can be marketed as celebrities, as politicians, for example. Sports people tend to have their own marketing to back them up and to sort of project their image today. Ideas, whether it's ideas like democracy or fair trade or free market economic ideas, that people now increasingly tend to be looking to market their ideas. Particular causes can be marketed, political and charitable causes, for example. Policies from government increasingly are marketed to the population rather than just imposed upon them. And also lifestyles. We start to have the idea of lifestyle marketing and people trying to promote to us a way of living that maybe embodies a whole range of products and services and behaviours. So marketing is really very flexible in terms of what it can be applied to. It's also worth pointing out that marketing can exist at more than one level, that sometimes when we talk about marketing in a commercial sense, it's about particular goods, particular services, particular brands being marketed, but sometimes also a whole company can be marketed. So you might have a company being established as a brand and marketed. And today, increasingly, we see the combination of company level and product level brand marketing coming together. Marketing has very much evolved over time. You can say that marketing as an activity has existed really as long as humans have engaged in some kind of commerce, some kind of trade and exchange. If we go back to before the Industrial Revolution, to what we might call the simple trade era, at that time, people still did practice marketing, but in a very informal and a very simple sense. That if you were the village baker, you would tend to find out what type of bread the people in your village would like, and you would tend to bake the type of bread they liked. And if you were the local potter, you'd know your customers well enough to make the type of pots that people did like. Now, with the rise of industrialization, the growth in mass production, what you began to see was the moving away of the economy from a relatively local economy in most instances to increasing a national and eventually international and global economy. So over time, consumers have become much more distant from producers than ever they were in the pre-industrial era. And I think one of the roles that marketing has fulfilled over the years is really to try and reconnect consumers and producers, in a way that maybe they were more closely connected and understood one another much more closely in the pre-industrial era. As sort of the Industrial Revolution grew pace, we moved into what was called the production era, when there were tremendous advances in our ability to make products, to mass produce products. And what we began to see is a type of marketing very much that was there to serve the production, to find markets for the goods and services that were developed, to create distribution systems, to find ways of pricing them that would generate profitability. So it's very much about marketing as an operation that served the production arm of the business in those days. Between the 1920s and 1940s, I think what was more the sales era, that there was tremendous sophistication in selling, that we started to get into marketing, much more insight from things like psychology, about consumer psychology, and also in terms of industrial biopsychology. And we started to develop much more sophisticated sales operations as a focus for marketing, much more sophisticated retailing, for example, to try and persuade customers to buy from particular companies and to choose particular brands. I think during the 1940s to the 1960s, we had this sort of marketing department era in terms of really this activity becoming much more formalized, that you'd have a marketing department responsible for these activities, and you tended to get more in the way of planning, in terms of research, in terms of control of the selling and marketing activity that went on. And then I think what we can see as really the beginnings of much more modern marketing is the marketing company era, at the point at which people began to think about not just marketing as the selling of products, but the marketing of products and something that the whole company had a role to play in. And I think that was most famously expressed by Peter Drucker, one of the great management and marketing gurus, who said that marketing was effectively the whole business seen from the customer's point of view. So it was this idea that a truly marketing-orientated company would start to think about everything it does in terms of satisfying the consumer's needs and being in tune with the nature of the consumer. So that brings us up to the sort of 1990s. Moving into the 1990s and beyond, we start to see other forms of marketing emerging, and particularly this idea that it's not just about excellence in terms of the execution of a marketing agenda and a marketing process that we'll look at in a moment, but also maybe it's about building relationships, that we started to talk about things like customer relationship management being crucial to marketing, and that success came more from building good and long-lasting relationships with customers than just simply finding an effective way of marketing products to them. And then at the very end, you could say, well, we're moving into an era of marketing where actually much of it is moving away from the traditional commercial sphere, much of it moving much more online, if not in terms of the actual selling of products and like e-commerce solutions, but in terms of building those relationships with customers, that the online environment is where people are arguing much of the new marketing agenda exists. But it's just to really give you a flavour of the idea that marketing has never been one thing at a particular point of time in time. It has always evolved over time. We talked about their modern marketing, that really by the end of the 1970s, you could say there's this quite strong notion of what modern managerial marketing consisted of was in place. And you still find this very strongly reflected in the marketing textbooks that you'll find on the shelves of a typical university library. And a certain number of key elements of the marketing recipe, if you like, have become very well developed, very much accepted by that time. The first was the marketing philosophy, the idea that the customer should be the starting point of everything that the company does, and that through the use of market research and an understanding of the customer, that should really drive everything that a customer does, that a company does, that although it may be about generating a profit, the way you reach profit is by actually understanding and meeting the needs and wants of those customers. The second element is the marketing environment, and this is something that Frank will be going through in much more detail in Lecture 4. But the idea that a company doesn't just exist in isolation with its customers, that it has a range of other organisations and influences in the environment, from competitors to other forms of organisation that it might depend on, to a whole range of social, political, economic trends that it may have to respond to, and that may influence its customers. So it's putting marketing in much more of a context and understanding it as something that exists within this very influential environment. Marketing research as the foundation of good marketing, that you don't just guess what the customer wants, you actually go out and research it carefully. You also do systematic research to understand what competitors are offering, to try and come up with something that has a competitive advantage compared to those competitors. The notion of segmentation, that all customers are not the same, that customers will have different wants and needs, different characteristics, and may need a different adjustment of the marketing mix in terms of meeting their particular requirements. So this idea that to really understand a market, you can't just produce one offering and throw that to the whole market. You very often need to understand the market, break it down into groups of customers with common interests, common characteristics, common needs, to try and create a more sort of customized mix of offerings to be able to deliver to them. I just mentioned the marketing mix there, and the standard marketing mix that has endured has very much been the 4 Ps, the infamous 4 Ps of product, place, and place meaning distribution issues, price and promotion. It has been tremendously heavily criticised. Many people have said it's far too simplistic. It's not really that helpful, that marketing is really far more complex than that in terms of the variables that marketers have at their disposal to try and build relationships with customers and deliver value to them. But it has endured. It's simple, it's memorable, it begins with the same letter P, so people seem to keep liking it. So that conventional marketing mix does seem to have endured from the 1960s, really, when it was first developed, until this day. We've mentioned competitive advantage, differentiating a product from what competitors offer. And again, that's very central to marketing, that you can't just succeed by doing the same thing as the competitors do. You have to be better, cheaper, faster, more stylish, more responsive in some way in the offering that you provide to customers, either a real difference or a difference that at least consumers perceive, in order to win over the customer ahead of the competition. And that's very much the sort of core of marketing, is that principle of winning over the competition, winning over the customers rather better than the competition. And then finally, in terms of holding the whole thing together, is this notion of a formalized marketing planning process and viewing marketing as a structured management process. And many companies engage in marketing activities, but unless it's held together in a structured and systemized process underpinned by a marketing philosophy that orientates you around customers, then you're not really doing proper marketing. So I think true marketing really, it was seen involved a combination of these different elements of what we call modern marketing. However, by the sort of 1990s and moving into 2000, I think there was perception grew that although marketing as a discipline during the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s had matured and seemed to have gone from strength to strength, both in terms of practice and in terms of scholarly understanding of marketing, I think there was this growing sense that the field had stopped developing and wasn't really meeting its aspirations of truly understanding or fulfilling customers' needs and wants. And the leading scholar, Christian Gruners, wrote some very influential studies and books, really taking a critical look at marketing and saying, well, and in fact, the first chapter of his last book, the chapter was entitled Marketing in Crisis, seeing that really marketing as a discipline, he felt had fallen into the trap of worrying very much about acquiring new customers almost at any cost, about overemphasizing a tendency to make promises to customers about the value and about the benefits that would be delivered to them, really almost regardless of whether or not companies were able to actually fulfill those promises and those expectations. And that this emphasis on too much trying to win new customers, not enough emphasis on actually building and maintaining relationships with those customers, was starting to erode the credibility of the marketing discipline. And academically, it's become part of a debate about whether the underlying logic has changed, because the underpinning logic that came from what we call modern marketing had sort of run its course. That really, if we go back in our evolution to the sort of before the 20th century, that we had a very economically driven approach to business, very much focused on the exchange of goods and services, on money, on a transaction sort of perspective. And that sort of neoclassical economics-based view of marketing really took us through most of the 20th century, through the early development of disciplines like marketing research and through into the development of the marketing management school of thought, which arose in the second half of the 20th century, which gave us the marketing philosophy, gave us the process, gave us sort of a very much more scientific way to address marketing and to understanding and meeting customer needs. And a great deal of good work went on to making that increasingly effective, increasingly efficient, and trying to widen it out in terms of seeing marketing more widely as a sort of social economic process, to think about issues like service quality, building relationships with customers, delivering value to them. And yet really, that line of thinking had gradually started to run out of ideas, I think, and because of its roots and its origins in terms of thinking about tangible products as a starting point, and very much about transactions of an exchange of money for goods and services. So on the right-hand side of the model you can see behind me that comes from Vargo and Lush in a very influential paper they published in Journal of Marketing, was this idea that in the 21st century we're moving much more towards a service-centered type of marketing and focus on exchange, that it's no longer about tangible products so much, it's much more about intangibles, about services, about a sense of value, and about building relationships with customers, and that really the way forward for the discipline is to move away from this type of marketing, which is systematic and process-based, but has its roots very strongly in tangible products, to move much more towards this more relationship-based marketing that worries more about the intangibles that influence the relationship with the consumer. And these kind of changes, I think, and the broader changes and concerns about sustainability, you can see mirrored in this new definition of marketing that was proposed by the Chartered Institute of Marketing in 2007. And you'll see it still maintains the ideas that it's about a business function, a management process, but it's about much more than that. It's about developing innovations. It's about things like good customer service. It's about communicating effectively with customers. And that in operating in a very customer-focused way, benefits flow, not just to the customer, but also in terms of investors with return on investment, with a wider range of stakeholders. So it's not just about the customer, it's not just about the shareholder, it's about a much wider range of stakeholders, something we'll explore in some of the later lectures. It's also about the community that businesses operate in. It's not just a very closed system business transaction, it's about more than that. It's about the implications that the way in which we market have for the community and have for sustainability, and in terms of the future of business and the future of the planet. So much broader range of issues. Now it's quite interesting that this particular definition, when the CIM proposed it back in 2007, actually proved very controversial. A lot of people criticised it. They said it was too complicated. It took marketing into areas like worrying about the community or worrying about sustainability that maybe it shouldn't be going into, and that it was by no means a smooth adoption of it. And in fact, to a large extent, large parts of the CIM have gone back to using the older, simpler definition, because this one caused quite a lot of controversy and was viewed as too complex. But I think this is symptomatic of the way in which marketing increasingly is being understood, not as just a very simple process that's about meeting customer needs better than the competition. It's about understanding marketing as part of a broader social, economic and environmental system, and of trying to find ways of making it more effective and much more relationship-based than it ever has been in the past. And that really takes us into our vision of sustainability marketing, and we've kind of rather cheesily called it marketing forever, and with the ever being a set of initials to try and remember some of the things that we feel makes sustainability marketing special as an approach to marketing. The first, that it is ecologically orientated. It recognises that marketing operates on a small and finite planet that has ecological limits, and unless we start to develop our marketing activity to satisfy our wants and needs, but in ways that don't compromise the health of the ecosystems on which we and all of our activities depend, then, in a sense, we will only impoverish future generations and the opportunities for future consumers to live good and sustainable lives. Despite that, it needs to be viable. So anything that companies do in the short term do need to be competitive. So if you're developing new and more sustainable products, they need to be technically feasible, and they need to be economically viable. They have to be able to compete in the marketplace. And we've seen some very well-intentioned attempts to develop new goods and services that are more sustainable that have failed because they weren't either technologically or economically viable in the marketplace. It also needs to be ethical. I think to be truly sustainable, marketing needs to be doing things for the right reason. It needs to be pursuing greater social justice and equity, or at least trying to not make things any worse, to try and actually address some of the lack of equity that economic development has delivered over the 20th century, as we discussed in the last episode. And then finally, it needs to be relationship-based. It needs to understand it's not just about providing goods and services to customers in exchange for money. It's about building and maintaining value-based relationship with those customers over time. And not just customers as well, but other key stakeholders. And that it's in that relationship management and development issue that is really key to long-term business success. And I think a whole range of different thinkers from different disciplines and different areas of marketing are starting to come to really the same conclusion, that it's relationship-based excellence is going to be very important for marketing success in the future. So to try and express that visually, what we feel is that modern marketing, as it has existed and tended to dominate the field as a way of thinking about marketing for many years, it tended to be very narrowly focused in terms of it was saw things very much just in commercial transactions terms, and it was also relatively narrow in its scope in that it just stuck to markets and as an issue and didn't necessarily think more broadly. I think over time what we've seen is relationship marketing evolving as a type of marketing and approach to marketing that's less narrowly focused because it thinks more in relationship terms. So you're thinking of a much kind of wider and deeper way of interacting with consumers rather than just that transaction moment of selling a product to them. But also on the other side, what we've seen over recent years is concerns about ecologically orientated marketing, ethically orientated marketing, which gets beyond just the simple market as the arena for thinking about marketing and how it's practiced, but think of it in the context of society, in the context of the planet, to think about more ethical and more environmentally sound ways of marketing. And really, sustainability marketing tries to bring those two trends together so that we end up with a form of marketing which is a natural extension of the relationship marketing school of thinking that's become very strong over the last 10 years, combined with those concerns about ecological marketing and ethical marketing that, again, have very much emerged over the last 20 years or so. And that if you can put those together in a way that combines them and achieves economic success through them, that you have a form of marketing that really we think is fit for the future. So in terms of just reviewing the concepts we've discussed in this episode, you might want to review what the core components of the modern mainstream marketing discipline are, and also think about in what way sustainability marketing represents an evolutionary development of existing marketing practices and those elements of it that you might think of as more revolutionary. In terms of references, the first chapter from our book obviously discusses most of the issues that I've touched upon during this episode. I'd also recommend the online resource, The Evolution of Marketing from D.S. White. It also includes embedded within it a link to another very good and detailed timeline of the development of marketing, which is very, very good and easy way to understand how marketing has developed over the years. And then finally, Christian Grunrost's book, In Search of a New Logic for Marketing, I'd recommend very strongly to you because I think it was one of the most important occasions on which a leading scholar had stepped back and taken a very critical look at the way in which marketing had developed over the several decades before that, and come to the conclusion that really it is found wanting, it isn't really fit for the future, and we do need a very different way of thinking about marketing, really in all its different perspectives. So thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.